Thank you very much for your invitation in this indiscipline workshop. And I think I'm going to be supremely indisciplined in a sense because I'm a historian and I also work, in fact, very little on patents. So apologies in advance for being rather outside of the patent realm in this. Not entirely though. So what I would like to do here is to give a short, fast and very informal presentation of my ERC project, which is actually, in fact, starting this month. So this is good timing and a wonderful place to start. This is the title of the project, obviously, this creative IPR, which does not automatically mean that IPRs are creative, but means that I want to develop a history of IPRs in the so-called creative industries. One important point here from the onset too is to criticize what are the creative industries. It's a term that's been heavily used, for example, in Britain by the New Labour. The scope of the project is clearly European and also aims to keep a very critical gaze on what these so-called creative industries can be. So yes, I'm a historian. I work mainly on the 20th century. I go backwards a little bit to the mid-19th century, something like that. It's a rather open framework. And so therefore I've been very eager to look at historiography. I will tell you a little bit more in a bit about the background for this project, how this project developed. About state of the art, we have this. There is wars in each of these titles. I sit in a very classical history department where people actually study wars, hot wars, cold wars. So here I have another war on my arms, right? And departing from that, I thought, okay, what can we do? I'm from Brussels, but I now live in Oslo. I live in a peace nation, so I think I'm a pacifist, so that also gave me some thoughts. And I realized that maybe a source of the wars is this, that we have one big IPR umbrella laws that seem to cover these science, okay, pardon the very shortcut here with the image, and these people doing arts, right? Should we use the same rights for all these different activities? That's a very candid question, but that's a question I put at the core when I wrote the project. And I decided that no, we shouldn't do that. We should keep things different. So that's what I'm doing in the project, and I thought, take it or leave it, but I will focus only on the so-called creative industries, right? Arts, culture, aesthetics, we can find several words to think about that. What's happening in these creative workshops? I also have a background in economic history, and I've been interested in this question. I've looked at entrepreneurs. I look at firms a lot. Who works in firms, but also who captures value. Not creates value, but captures value. And here is one of the heroines of the story before I started the project. She's called Madeleine Vionnet. She's a couture entrepreneur from Paris. And here she's creating a dress on a doll, and she set to the task, she really developed wars in order to capture value with her trade. Right or wrong, right? Is it something to do? She ousted some competitors of the business in very violent ways using IPs. Another case is the Nike firm, right? Capturing value from immaterial property and getting it out of the circuits of tax, engaging in tax evasion using IPR revenue. So that's also a way to capture value and get it out of the public treasury, for example, in this case. Capturing value in the music business, Aretha Franklin passed away when I presented the project for the first time, and there were controversies about that. Did she capture all the value from her song? She should have, while others maybe captured more value to the detriment of some people who were in the studio with them. Right? So that's a question. Who captures value? Maybe try to measure that. That's a difficult question, of course. And also engage with why some people capture more value than others. Is it because of gender? Is it because of race? Is it because of place? And is it because of course of time? Because this is historically contingent. looking more concretely at this question of value, can we measure it? So I'm looking at 2 industries, and when building the project, I looked around. I tried different industries. I had fashion because I've been working on fashion and part on IPR for nearly 10 years now. And this is the royalty model of Christian Dior in the 1980s, 90s. I always heard fashion is too derivative, there's no value creation there. No, there is, right? We have these very nice dark blue slides. And then I thought an industry that maybe was reacting very differently to technological change, to IPs, of course, and eventually I landed with music. So the project is going to expand the comparative dimension, with, especially with a focus on cases from these 2 industries. It's a history project, so it's a project that aims to deepen work in the archives. I will tell you a little bit more in a minute about why these archives, but we will look as a team to the archives of international associations, Bureaux Internationaux Réunis pour la Propriété Intellectuelle, and then WIPO, that we just discussed, that they discussed in this paper. A very important source for archives also is the cooperative societies for the distribution of authors' rights. And in the fashion business, that would be interest groups. That's called chambres syndicales, sort of employers' unions also, with a view of managing authors' rights and also lobbying. That's very important to the project. We will also use archives from the courts, from lawyers, from the police, if we look at counterfeiting cases, piracy cases, which is probably a more classical history take at these problems, and looking at private actors and business archives. Here is an example of taken from archives and preliminary research. These couturiers that I showed you earlier in the picture popularized IPR lawsuits against so-called pirates. And what I've sought to do, looking here, is not only identifying the plaintiff, but also identifying the persons who were sued as so-called copycats and trying to see what was going on there, what kind of business people they were, and results can be interesting. This research has enormously benefiting from the digitalization of French archives and French press. So it's been possible for me to search smaller actors. Typically the people who are sued for copying or piracy have disappeared, right, from the memory, but not from the press. And so it was possible to look at what was the nature of these enterprises. And then a new narrative emerges, which is that this is not necessarily a narrative of piracy, but of business competition, right? Sue your business competitors in order to get hegemony on the market. This business is also hired lawyers, and that's also something to look at, is fashion, luxury. I enlarge now fashion to luxury. How and when lawyers enter these businesses, when lawyers become main actors. And it's possible then to track them, right, to see what are they doing there, why all these firms systematically hire lawyers and make it a huge dimension of their business. Right, and then the question also of international lawsuits, I will go back to that. So I've looked a lot at France, and then how they try also to get a foothold in America and lobby there. So it's a history of business competition. Looking also at the different dimensions of these IPs. Here I took, someone talked to me yesterday about the materiality of this. So this is then a good example with protecting a logo, a trademark, but also using all over, using trade dress, which is a neighboring right that's much more in use in the US, for example. So completing intellectual property rights portfolios, right? To try to use a whole range of IPs, copyright a lot in France, here logos, and here trying progressively, and that's something I will pursue in the project, try to make tables and see which rights are used by whom, when, and where, and really developing this grid. So I was interested from the fashion business looking at France, and we see at once that author's right and copyright are different, but also what's the place for trademark, how case law comes to play in this, if there is a place for patents, there is a place for patents, but it's often too slow, too expensive for fashion. It doesn't really match so completely. But every now and then, there are patents taken, for example, for shapes of more technical objects, maybe cosmetic boxes, handbags, special fabrics, fabric that's pleated and comes back into place before one invents Lycra, for example. These kind of things come to the fore. But I don't pursue that systematically. I rather look at IP portfolios and at the lawsuits and what comes to the fore there. Right? So less presence of patent than the others. Who lobbies? That's also been so this is still preliminary research to the project, right, of previous articles that have led into the project. Who lobbies? So this is again the case of the fashion industry, and in the project the aim will be to have other work packages examining lobbies in other types of creative industries. And which type of lobbies across the Atlantic here in this case. Innovations as well, with here in the case of fashion again, how eventually this could develop in a system of royalties. I won't say too much about that, but it's open for questions. But I would like to go back to the architecture of the project, which is really what's taking me here, with these 4 work packages. One is a background history of IPs that everyone will feed in, so with a database where everyone will keep adding bibliography, historical resources, and so on, so that we can be swift and communalize these resources between project members. So that's all project members. A macro dimension, looking at international organizations, the Bureaux Internationaux Réunis and the WIPO, in regard always to the creative industries, right? So to look at the dimensions that are of interest for the industries that I want to approach as cases. The micro dimension then, looking at authors' rights societies and industries with music and fashion. And this work will be informed by 5 cross-cutting themes. One is authorship and creativity, and the changing literature about that, showing also that it's historically contingent. One is history, the second one, therefore, is history of the firms. Central pillar is technological change, legal frameworks, and the question of the commons, and whether they get enclosed by such mechanisms. So here is the overarching design. How this weaves together the cross-cutting themes and the work packages. More concretely, so background, there have been previous projects before that have also paved the way for this one. One on fashion called the Enterprise of Culture. It was a HERA project, so collective European project, and more recently a project about branding the Nordic countries. That was also a project with lawyers, so that's the projects before this one. Which team? So PI, that's me, one administrator who is already in place and will work 50% with me for the next 5 years. And then it's a symmetric design of two PhDs and 2 postdocs who will engage with the different macro and micro dimensions work packages. The advisory board, that mixes people from law, business, management, and history. I think that's the multidisciplinary aspect here. And this is where things become really severe, which is the planned output. And there is a website also that will keep being fed by all the different events and so on. And so you're warmly welcome to go have a look and drop me a line if you have any questions or interest in this new project. So that's it for now, and questions are more than welcome.
Thank you so much.